Good morning, good evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. This session marks the culmination of our 3-day and first ever virtual conference filled with debate, discussion around some of the most pertinent issues facing India today. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our incredible lineup of speakers gathered this evening to shed light on the single most important issue weighing on the minds of governments, businesses, individuals, really you and I, and everyone globally. It's COVID-19 vaccines. We have here today Ms. Anuradha Gupta, the Deputy CEO of GAVI, the Global Vaccine Alliance. Prior to this, Ms. Gupta served as the Mission Director of the National Health Mission of India, running the largest health program in the world. Mr. Adar Poonawalla is the Chief Executive Officer of the Serum Institute of India, the world's largest vaccine manufacturer measured by the number of doses produced. And we have here with us today Professor Tarun Khanna, who's taught at the Harvard Business School and the Harvard College for 25 years, focusing on the role of entrepreneurs in developing countries. He's also the founder and board member of several commercial and nonprofit ventures across emerging markets. Since 2015, he's also been appointed to several national commissions by the Government of India on issues related to entrepreneurship, higher education. And now, without further ado, over to you, Professor Khanna.
Great, thank you, Shaheen. Welcome, everybody. It's a privilege to be here with Adar and Anuradha, who need no introduction. Thank you both for kindly taking time from your no doubt pressing schedules in this incredibly important time for the world economy and for India vis-a-vis vaccine rollouts and so on. We appreciate it greatly. It's great to see the India conference come this far. I was instrumental in starting it 20 odd years ago, and it's wonderful that the students have kept it alive. And it's thanks in no small measure, not just to their efforts, but to people like yourself. So thank you again on behalf of the community here. I don't think it makes sense to spend too much time on introducing the issues other than to observe that in Adar and Anuradha, we really have two splendid examples of important knowledge bases of what we need to understand vis-a-vis vaccine rollout, efficacy, et cetera, and a number of the open questions. Adar, of course, at the Serum Institutes represents the supply side, if you will, of the vaccine situation. Anuradha, in her stewardship role at GAVI, is responsible for making sure that demand for these vaccines is adequately catered to, particularly among the poor countries of the world, which is why GAVI was set up. Brilliant insight by our favorite entrepreneur, Bill Gates, 20 odd years ago. And of course, Anuradha knows a great deal about India. So again, a privilege to have you both. What we're going to do in this panel is both our speakers will make some introductory comments, setting the stage and giving us some perspective from their respective vantage points. And then I'll moderate a Q&A, moderate a discussion for a little while as the spirits move us fairly informally. And we should open up to questions around midnight or just after midnight Eastern time, Boston time. It is late in Boston, so we'll try to stick to the schedule as best as we can. So Adar, without further ado, would you give our audience a sense of, you and I last spoke in April or May, and the pandemic already had been visited upon the world. And at that time, you were looking ahead and trying to figure out what the options would be vis-a-vis vaccine licensing and making your preemptive capacity planning, investments, and so on and so forth, capital raising, et cetera. So if you could somehow give a sense of how things have evolved in the last 8 to 9 months, that would be terrific.
So thank you, Tarun. And it's a privilege and honor to address all of you here at the Harvard India Conference and to be here with Anuradha and, who I've worked with for many, many years. So I'll just give everyone a perspective, roughly, in fact, this time last year, we were all in a confused, scrambling state of not knowing what to do, us included, because there was this dilemma that do we, as a manufacturer, wait for vaccines to be developed and licensed and then try to do some partnerships and develop our own vaccines, which are going to take about 2 years to do. Traditionally it takes 6 to 7 years to make a vaccine. It took us 6 years to make a vaccine against pneumonia, for example, which we licensed last year. So at this stage, we were talking to Oxford, AstraZeneca, Novavax, and a few other companies. And amongst a lot of different developers and innovators who had thrown their hat into the vaccine race, we had to very quickly sign up these commercial partnerships to be able to manufacture these very large volumes that the world would naturally need, India included, because India has 1.3, 1.4 billion people. And we also knew at that time that the vaccines would be at least 2-dose vaccines. So the capacity that we had to build in the face of huge uncertainty was something even we had never done before. We produce about 1.5 billion doses a year of pediatric vaccines that we supply to GAVI and other countries. So we had to add another billion dose capacity literally overnight. So we scrambled on getting equipments in record time, because that also, vaccine manufacturing equipments and facilities take 2 to 3 years to build. So I had to rejig existing facilities, order away equipment, and get that delivered and installed. So whilst I was doing that, in parallel, we were inking in partnerships with other developers and also starting clinical trials in India. As soon as I reached sort of August, September of 2020, I took a very important decision, which was supported by Bill Gates and his foundation, along with 2 or 3 other countries, which advanced hundreds of millions of dollars to me, along with what I put in, because we needed about $800 million to get all this done in terms of the OPEX and the CAPEX. So again, the challenge was funding, to get all this done, buying vials and raw materials ahead of time, because in August, September, I wanted to start stockpiling the product, because I knew that in December, when I did get licensed on the 2nd of January, which was a huge relief, because, the whole year we were spending to hoping that this vaccine would work and be efficacious and be safe, which it is. And we'll come to that later on. So we stockpiled millions of doses ahead of time, which is why in January, we were able to be one of the few manufacturers that, could ship out millions of doses. We've dispatched around 60 million doses between India and exports now. And, we're maintaining a 60 to 70 million dose production on a monthly basis going forward. And we'll add to that as time goes on. So that's, what we went through. And now if you look at the challenges that lie ahead, I thought I could relax in 2021, but, things are even more hectic and busier than ever, because every country, every government, including India, is now pulling at the supplies and capacities that Serum Institute has. And we're relying on other manufacturers also, which hopefully will be licensed in a few months. But you see, the challenge that everyone should understand is that vaccine production takes time. It's not like making a batch of cookies that can be available in a month. You need to make the bulk drug substance, then you fill it, you finish it, pack it, test it, right? All of that takes months. And that's what you're going to see. All these other manufacturers that have begun production, for them to churn out large volumes, it's still going to take a few months. So that's where we are today. And, something that we can learn from the past is some of the mistakes that we all made together, which was things like, not getting ahead on global harmonization of regulation, where, for example, if we all came together, for example, US FDA, UK MHRA, EMEA, WHO, and a few other countries, the product and these manufacturers who were licensed in their countries could have launched the vaccines that much sooner. But, these mistakes, or sort of, I wouldn't call them mistakes, I would call them a little oversight, that we can learn from that, have that in place so that all the new vaccine manufacturers now, including ourselves for the new vaccines, could launch these vaccines and make them available to countries that much sooner if we have this level of global harmonization of regulations, so that, you don't have to go to each country or each region to further get your product qualified, which already adheres to the highest quality standards. So these are some of the things that we've learned, and we can do better this year. And, in my opinion, as I conclude these opening remarks, I think in about 6 to 7 months, we're going to see a huge improvement to the supply situation, given the situation what we're in today from the status quo. So it's all good things. It's all moving in the right direction. And let me just say that this wouldn't have been possible without COVAX and the huge effort that COVAX has taken between getting countries, WHO, GAVI, UNICEF, everything together to arrange the funding, the logistics, and most importantly, manage equitable distribution of vaccines across different countries so that you don't have richer and poorer countries not getting equitable access. But I'll let Anuradha speak on that. But I just wanted to mention the tremendous work that COVAX has achieved with GAVI and everyone in that. So I'll leave it at that, and then happy to answer other questions as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Adar. Before we go to Anuradha, can I just ask you a question? As I understood in your comments, the primary source of uncertainty in the beginning had to do with which of the different possible vaccine candidates you bet on in some ways and make manufacturing capacity. I take it from that manufacturing capacity is fairly specific to the particular type of vaccine, or was there some flexibility in the capacity?
No, absolutely right. So, we had different buildings for different dedicated technologies and vaccines that we were already making. Our luck, I would call it luck, because we had a new facility that was being commissioned for making monoclonal antibodies for HIV and so many other different generic monoclonal antibodies. So we quickly rejigged that, and we were able to use that. And now we've got 2 more facilities, that were dedicated for new product launches, which I've sacrificed for the next 2-3 years. And that's how we were able to manage these specific technologies that we need for viral vector vaccines, live attenuated vaccines, and the subunit protein vaccines. So we've got these 3 different ones that we will be developing and launching also this year.
And is there any, well, any is too strong, but is there considerable uncertainty about how the vaccines will adapt to the new variants that are popping up in different places, which of course we should expect to continue to see happening, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of conjecture about it. I mean, if you look at severe disease, and this is what we've tried to explain to everyone who is panicking at the moment, that as far as the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine goes, and then I'll comment on Novavax or the others later, it does protect against severe disease. So you haven't seen hospitalization. You've seen mild to moderate disease. That's where you found South Africa and some other countries, getting a bit concerned. But we've tried to explain to them, and they are understanding that. But having said that, Oxford is already working on trying to tweak and make a variant by the end of this year. So there will be different versions of the original vaccines. I know maybe Pfizer, Moderna may do it. Novavax may not. It
ended by host, right? It's ended by host.
Ended by host, yeah.
Yeah.
Should we continue? And Ms. Gupta can...
Sure.
Let me know when we're back, and then we can...
yes,
okay.
we're ready to go.
Okay. So as I was saying, these variants, will be taken care of by these modifications that vaccine developers will go into. But at the moment, from what we have heard and what we've seen in the field, these vaccines do protect against severe disease, which means that you won't be hospitalized. You probably won't need a ventilator and all that treatment. You may get mild to moderate disease. So fever and other symptoms, headaches at home, and you can be treated by, simple paracetamols and maybe some other drugs. So to answer your question, that's the case with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. The Novavax vaccine has shown good efficacy, even against the South African variant.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they'll get into modifying their vaccine at the moment. But of course, as more variants emerge, because vaccination programs are getting sort of delayed and deferred due to supply constraints, that may be an issue that we'll have to deal with next year. But at the moment, we're okay.
And you haven't had much engagement with the mRNA vaccines, have you?
No, because, that is something we've said that I might engage with in 2 or 3 years once I'm confident in looking at the data of safety and efficacy of how that works. Because as we all know, this is a new experimental technology where for the first time, it's been used to license a vaccine, at this pandemic time. And, people have been trying to develop messenger RNA vaccines. It's a great platform. And we hope that, going forward, we can develop other vaccines, but we're just waiting to see how that goes. Because again, don't forget the countries that we want to supply to and serve the needs of those nations like Africa, India, and so many others, the cold chain requirements would certainly be an issue, with -20, -70, when we're talking about these large scale campaigns where hundreds of millions of doses have to go out. The cold chain infrastructure can't handle it. So maybe we'll look at the messenger RNA vaccines 2-3 years down the line when they become more stable at the +2 to 8 degree storage conditions. And then it might make sense for us to do that. You're on mute.
I was just saying, Adar, I saw some data saying that they're already moving in that direction. Any case, I hope it turns out to be safe because everybody in my family here is getting those. So we shall see. I'll report back to you. But thank you. Oh, we have Anuradha back. Anuradha, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, fine. I'd love to have you back. So why don't you give us a lay of the land from your perch in Geneva, from GAVI's perch, both globally and then zeroing in maybe into India, if you don't mind.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much, Adar, for giving that perspective. And let me just add a little bit of global view of where things stand today. We know that COVID-19 has devastated the world, and the consequences are not just limited to public health, they're also social and economic. In a way, COVID-19 is spreading the fault lines of an unequal world marked by disturbing inequities in wealth, health, social protection, basic dignity. And in my opinion, nexus between equity and global health security has never been more evident. What is also important, as Professor Khanna noted, is that the virus is rapidly changing its form. So there are several new variants which make it even harder to predict the velocity and trajectory of this disease. And some of the emerging challenges also mean that we would have to constantly reevaluate our exit strategy. There is, of course, a lot of spotlight on vaccines, COVAX, India, and Indian manufacturers for their role in launching the vaccines, giving billions of doses, halting the march of this catastrophic virus. From my perspective, at the heart of this whole discussion is the imperative of rapid, fair, and equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines, as Adar alluded to. In a highly interconnected world, no one is safe until everyone is safe. And this is precisely why COVAX, which is co-led by GAVI, WHO, and CEPI, was set up at such an unprecedented pace. The vision driving this global mechanism is to bring the world together in making sure that all countries, regardless of their income or paying capacity, or regardless of the fact they have vaccine manufacturing capacity on their soil, receive enough vaccines within this year to protect vulnerable and high-risk populations. COVAX, of course, builds on GAVI's phenomenal success in expanding equitable access to life-saving vaccines in 73 low-income countries that together account for 60% of the world's birth cohort. And as a result, child deaths due to vaccine-preventable diseases have declined by an astounding 70% since GAVI started its work in 2000. We are the world's largest purchaser of childhood vaccines. And what is very unique about GAVI's model is that we bring long-term stable demand, which is backed by highly predictable financing. And this is what has incentivized the market entry of many new manufacturers from developing countries, particularly India, which is now such a giant powerhouse of vaccine production, and therefore the biggest hope for rapid and bulk production of COVID-19 vaccines. Serum Institute of India and I'm really pleased that Adar is here with us today, is the largest among the 5 Indian manufacturers who have supplied billions of doses to GAVI, helping save more than 15 million lives around the world. The Indian vaccine industry has also played a historic role in making vaccines highly affordable. For example, Serum Institute of India is now supplying us pneumococcal vaccines, which is such a complex vaccine to produce, at a price of just $2 per dose. The cost in rich countries is more than $100 per dose for this vaccine. Likewise, another Indian manufacturer, Bharat Biotech, is supplying GAVI Rota vaccine at a mere 95 cents. And this vaccine also costs over $100 in advanced markets. This is incredible contribution to social impact at scale by vaccine manufacturers of India. And it is this long-standing partnership between GAVI and the Indian vaccine industry that is helping us mount such a big united fight against COVID-19 now. The GAVI Alliance, and Adar mentioned this, was very quick to support Serum Institute of India with $300 million in pre-financing so that they could ramp up the production of AstraZeneca and Novavax vaccines. These 2 vaccines from SII are a major part of the COVAX portfolio. They would play a very significant role in reaching the COVAX goal of supplying more than 1 billion doses in this year to 92 countries that are fiscally constrained and would thus receive free COVID vaccines from GAVI. And I do want to clarify that COVAX actually brings together rich and non-rich countries. 190 countries are participating in COVAX. 98 countries would pay for the vaccine that they receive through COVAX, and 92 countries are fiscally challenged, therefore would receive vaccine through COVAX free of charge. So India is among these 92 countries and would receive upwards of 200 million doses from COVAX. We have begun to provide SII vaccines to Government of India and are also poised to send out vaccines to other countries within the next few days, which include a lot of countries in Africa, which are really waiting now for vaccines to arrive. So the pandemic, I would say, is testing human ingenuity and enterprise in remarkable ways. We are witnessing breakthrough innovations, both global and local, and unparalleled collaboration. India, like other countries, has suffered due to COVID-19. We've again started to see some spike in cases, but it also has an opportunity that many others do not have to rise as a global leader in the fight against COVID-19 and really help restore normality in a beleaguered world. Over to you, Professor Khanna.
Thank you, Anuradha. You know, I just wanted to add something to what you said about COVAX. I think one of the beauties of COVAX was that you have to ask yourself, why do these countries sign up to COVAX, right? And at the time that it was engineered, it was really a piece of remarkable, almost probabilistic reasoning, if I could put it that way, in the sense that people signed up because they didn't know, as Adar was saying, which vaccine would be efficacious. So if you're a small country, your choice was you take a chance, bet on a manufacturer, try to procure some doses ahead of time, and there was a decent chance that that vaccine wouldn't work out. And then you were out of luck. Better to bet on a portfolio that GAVI was offering you, defray your bets. And it was just that simple bit of ingenuity that triggered that. And of course, you know, under the leadership of Seth and Anuradha and others, GAVI coming back with CEPI and WHO to pull this off. I think it's just a remarkable feat. So you know, well done. But let me just play skeptic for a second to both of you. You both talked about, Anuradha, you more explicitly about equitable distribution of vaccines. But it's still the case that 80% of vaccines, I think, have been delivered in rich countries. So really, are we seeing equitable distribution? Or is it just a bit more equitable than it would have been without COVAX? If we want to be clear-eyed about it.
So you are right, Tarun. I would say that you have to look at equity from different angles, right? And at the time of H1N1, we had seen that poor countries never got even a single dose of vaccines. So this time, because of COVAX and because of all the advanced purchase commitments that we have, and also the huge support that we are receiving from advanced economies, we should not forget that 92 advanced market commitment countries can receive free vaccine through COVAX only because there is resource mobilization and resources are being contributed by advanced economies. So I think this whole goal of supplying 2 billion doses, out of which 1.3 billion doses would be for 92 lower income countries of the world, I think is a major step in the direction of equity. So where we are seeing some challenges that bilateral deals have continued, as you say, right? And also the ambition that is being set by many advanced economies is much higher. So several countries are wanting to vaccinate 70-80% of their population at great speed. Whereas in COVAX, we are trying to supply more than 20%. Enough doses to cover more than 20% of their population. Because the logic here is that if we are able to support these countries in vaccinating at least the most vulnerable high-risk populations, then we probably can make sure that the pandemic is not unnecessarily prolonged.
So, if you do the math, it looks to me that the rich countries, including the US and some of the Western European ones, have basically collected commitments to receive more vaccines than they have people as a result of making multiple bets and so on. So maybe there's room for a reallocation of these now going forward. Am I reading it correctly? Adar, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, let me just comment on that. Initially what you said was true, that you had the US, Canada, Europe, UK putting these large purchase orders and giving these upfront advances, $2 billion to Pfizer, Moderna, Novavax, so many other companies. And that's what sort of looked like all those doses are going to go to the rich countries, which, yes, partly that's already begun. But you've got countries like Canada who have openly now pledged and said that any excess doses eventually that they don't use, they will give to other countries, which is a great step forward and pledge to say that, look, we'll protect our nation because we owe that to our nation, but then we'll also, give doses to other. Now, if and when, however that happens, that's great. At least that's one thing. But the other part of it is, fortunately, the world, and I don't want to sound in an inappropriate way, but fortunately, the world has a couple of manufacturers in India who remain committed to poor countries and don't believe in making a huge profit during a pandemic, such as Serum Institute, Bharat Biotech, Biological Evans, maybe some other pharma companies will also do that. And our support, unconditional support to COVAX, GAVI, and our relationship enables us to balance that inequitable supply situation where if we were to have chosen to, if I was to have decided to sell at $10 to a rich country, I could have very easily, I can do that even right now. But I've chosen that my initial supplies must go to Africa and the poorer countries because there's nobody who can supply to them. They can't buy a Pfizer vaccine at $20 or whatever. So, and look, Pfizer and other companies, in all fairness, have higher costs. Fair enough. So let them take care of those nations. And of course, Pfizer and other companies are going to supply vaccines to poorer nations also, perhaps at a lower price, hopefully. I don't know. And they're also trying their best, which is very commendable. And the world appreciates that. But again, it's our major supply coming from Indian vaccine manufacturers, which is tipping that balance to be able to ensure that the poorer countries get enough affordable vaccines, and COVAX can, and that's exactly what we're trying to do with COVAX. So that's what you're going to see, that initially, yes, it looked like all the rich countries are going to buy all the doses, right? Which may be the case, but we're now catching up where Indian manufacturers and others will be able to fill that gap and service the poorer nations.
That's excellent. So it's just past midnight. I'm going to go to the, there's a whole host of questions coming here. So I will just pick and choose from these. They're not in any particular order, so bear with me while I scroll through. One of these other is just picking up on what you were just saying, which is what are the other countries that are looking at India with the vaccine? And of course, you alluded to it's the poorer countries are primarily reliant on those who can make vaccines much more efficiently, which includes those in India. And is it right for Serum Institute and others in India to be exporting to other countries when we have so many people in India who are not vaccinated?
Very good question. You know, I have a lot of pressure from my own government, from my own people, my own father, who is saying that, look, we have to protect our nation first. Everyone looks at our nation first. But then you see, the problem with that is that would be okay if I was just a small manufacturer with a limited capacity. But I almost feel a sense of responsibility to the world that, as Anuradha mentioned earlier, everyone is not safe to, you know, no one is safe till everyone is safe. Now, if I were to look at it and just give in to the pressure and just supply my entire stock to India, great, we'd be vaccinated ahead of other countries. But how does that serve the overall picture? What is the overall picture? When we start opening up traveling, when others come here, when we go there, you know, that's not serving the picture. And we want other economies to open up also. Let's look at it even from our selfish interest, that we want to protect ourselves for a moment, right? Let's not look at the larger picture. Look at the commercial angle to it in terms of commerce, trade, business, other economies opening up. If India is dependent on import, exports, and trade with other countries, whomsoever they may be, and you know, we're all dependent on it. It's a global economy now. If they don't open up, if those guys can't come back to work, if their health systems are overburdened with COVID-19, how are we all going to open up as a global economy? So that is why a global perspective is required. And to answer this question even further, after all, I am an Indian and I do care about my nation first, of course. Don't get me wrong. And that is why I've dedicated, and I always publicly said that 50% of my capacity will go to India. And if you look at just one country getting 50% of my entire capacity, which is rather large, that's already skewed in the sense that, you know, I'm being nationalistic as much as I possibly can. But going beyond that, and to be honest, right now, 60% of my capacity is going to India. So, you know, we have to have a little global picture. And look, this is a fight against this is a fight against the virus, against humanity. It's not just Indians. And we are all creatures of God, and we all have to come out of this together. So that is why, you know, to answer that question, we are exporting vaccines as well as giving to India. And, you know, I'm servicing all the needs of India so far that they've asked for. So we've not said no to anything that the government of India has asked us to do.
Thank you, Adar. Anuradha, how do you see you know, the whole raison d'être of GAVI was to care for the vulnerable, and as I recall, going back a couple of years, there were then debates in the GAVI board as to whether you should also think about vulnerable people in middle income and richer countries. Can you give some sense about that? You know, the same angst is playing out in my backyard in Boston as in my home in Delhi, right? Which is the poorer people are not getting vaccinated. Is it any different even in the rich countries, actually?
Yeah, so I think, Tarun, that's a very good question, because we are seeing the number of poor people in rich countries increasing. So I think the kind of divide that we saw decades ago, where you had poor countries and we had rich countries, you know, is now sort of, that distinction is getting blurred, right? So, and we know that the number of vulnerable, marginalized, poor people in some of the most advanced economies is on the increase. In fact, middle income countries as a bloc now have many more poor people than the lower income countries. So really the question here is, what is GAVI's comparative advantage, right? So one is that do we continue with a very focused approach? GAVI has succeeded because it's a niche player. it brought very sharp focus on lower income countries, as I said, 73 lower income countries. And that has given us phenomenal results. As I said, 70% fewer child deaths because of vaccine preventable diseases. This is astounding. And now the question is, if we start to engage with middle income countries or advanced economies, where the governments actually have the fiscal capacity, right, and the fiscal ability to run programs for their people. So, and this debate is still happening at the GAVI board. And this time in our new strategy, we have articulated a desire to start to engage more with middle income countries, but in a very highly strategic fashion, because there we want to focus on a couple of things. One is political advocacy. That how do we, because I think the power of political dialogue and advocacy should not be underestimated. We have seen that even in lower income countries that we engage with. And once there is political commitment and political ownership and greater understanding of some of the problems, because we also have to remember that a lot of these populations are invisible, mute. They do not have political influence. So just making them more visible and having that conversation can be helpful. So that is one. The second is we find that a lot of middle income countries haven't been able to proceed with new vaccine introductions. So you would be surprised that now the coverage of HIP, Rota, pneumococcal actually is higher in GAVI supported countries than the rest of the world. And that is because a lot of middle income countries just could not afford to introduce new vaccines. And therefore, that is another thing we want to focus on, because we know that diarrhea and pneumonia continue to be major killers of children, all across the globe. And therefore, a very focused approach to catalytic support to new vaccine introductions. And the third agenda that we want to focus is really the agenda of zero dose children. This is a new concept that we have introduced this year, where we are saying there are children in the community who do not receive even a single shot of the most basic DTP vaccine. And these zero dose children actually are markers of very acute societal inequities. And they take us into communities which are suffering from compounded vulnerability and multiple deprivations. So the point, and that is the focus, and that is the spotlight that we want to shine. And like in your backyard, if you have people then engaging with the government to say, look, these are people who, and as I said, there is a nexus now between equity and global health security. And I think we really need to highlight that more and more. And the last thing that we want to do with these countries is innovation, because what we have seen is, as a result of GAVI and the whole alliance efforts, there are remarkable innovations that have been rolled out and scaled up in GAVI supported countries. As I speak, just now I received an email from DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, where there are drones being used, to deliver vaccines to the most remote locations in that country. And that is GAVI, right? GAVI support. And they just came back to say now that is going to also help them deliver vaccines for Ebola, which is again rearing its head as we speak, but also COVID-19 vaccines. And these are some of the vaccine innovations that richer countries can also benefit from. So absolutely it is. And we are thinking that through this broader engagement with the middle income countries now, because we are supporting 92 countries, with COVID-19 vaccines, we will have that entry point where we will start to establish relationships in these countries to start focusing on things that I just outlined.
So, to this point, since we are in the Harvard community, one nice example is this company. I think this is the one that's doing the DRC zipline, which is started by one of our students at Harvard, and Keller, who very interestingly was supported by GAVI in the early days. Yeah,
Rwanda. We supported them in Rwanda.
That's right. And by the way, that has come into the US also, and I believe is coming to near Pune somewhere.
In fact, I've got a tie-up with them for 2 centers.
Correct, that's right. You told me that. Yeah, that's right.
But, sadly, it's a complicated thing getting air traffic control permissions and things like that. So till that is done, to have drones flying around, it's something good. It's forward thinking. I hope it takes off, but it has its
challenge. Adar, let's drill into that for a second, because I think there's a more general point there, which is, can the rules and regulations evolve fast enough to support some of the newer things. So this is a great point because, when Jayant Sinha was running civil aviation, I forget what his position was. I think he was one of the ministers for civil aviation. I remember he told me that he was working on drone rules. And so are you saying that those have not matured enough that Zipline can do it in Rwanda, but they can't do it in Pune?
So, I went deep into it with the Zipline team, including, I think, Keller, who's the CEO?
Keller is the guy.
We met, about a year before the pandemic, and I said I'll agree to sponsor 2 of the centers. For vaccines and blood products, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Would be taken. Now, the challenges that I put forward, and they still haven't been addressed, is that, of course, the air traffic control, which will have to now manage flying of jets, helicopters, other VIP movements, which, come about with, the government leaders who may just fly at any time, and their security issues. So what we came to a conclusion was, and this was an interesting sort of workaround, is that if the drone routes are permanently mapped on the ATC radar, so they're pre-approved, because I said, how can you go and keep getting approvals on a daily basis? You can't do it, So one solution was that the drones would only fly at a fixed time on those routes. So the air traffic control would know that on these routes, there are drones flying at this altitude, right? And no other flights should go here, So that was a workaround, and that made sense. But then again, the logistics of managing that at those timings, deliveries can only happen at those timings. So, in a restricted sense, that could be possible. And then you've got these centers which are sort of outside of the city limits, because you can't have drones flying around in case it fails and falls down into a population. You may have not casualties, but it'll probably knock off 1 or 2 people, because they're not very large drones, but still it's heavy. It's coming in at a high speed. God forbid something goes wrong. So there were safety concerns on that. So it was perhaps best suited to target the rural and outskirt areas, which are anyway hard to reach. And that's where I think even GAVI and everyone wanted to see if the drones can help reach those places where it would take, 50 kilometers for a guy to go on a bike, as opposed to that. And that's the part that would be replaced. It's not that all volumes and everything would be taken care of. Right. Drone deliveries, it's only the hard to reach areas.
So if I could also just add to that, Tarun, and that it is very interesting, because when we piloted this in Rwanda, this is exactly what happened, that we had to work with the civil aviation ministry. And it is really for rural areas and those areas. So Rwanda did not disturb their vaccine supply chain that was working very well in Rwanda. And they began with blood products, though it was a partnership between GAVI, Zipline, and government of Rwanda. They actually began with blood products and trying to take blood products to those remote facilities that could not otherwise get them. And that started to impact maternal mortality a lot, And similarly, in India, I always thought Northeast is an area which could really benefit from an intervention like that. So here the idea is not that drones would replace well-functioning supply chains, because if you have all your infrastructure in place, then drones don't make sense, right? But drones do make a lot of sense in those hard-to-reach, inaccessible areas. And then some of the issues that Adar highlighted do not exist there.
So let me shift gears a little just to be sensitive to a different line of questions that is coming up, which has to do more with barriers to distribution within India, right? Can both of you, and both of you can speak to this, can you categorize the 1 or 2 most significant limitations? So leaving aside the issue of vaccine supply, right? Adar's already said 60% of his capacity, and presumably the other guys are also putting in a lot of vaccines into India. So usko chodo, leave that aside. But other than that, what are the 1 or 2 things that we really need to crack to make sure that that vaccines get distributed as quickly as is efficacious? Adar, you want to go first?
Yeah. So, the obvious point where you've seen a lot of noise being made that open it up and partner with private sector. Now, traditionally when government vaccination programs have taken place, whether it's with GAVI or without GAVI and independently at the country level, the government generally does these universal immunization programs. But, that is okay as a model when we're talking about giving it to children, where there is, the clinics and other cold storage and other logistics, which is already set, like India has a very good system for that. Now, to add to that, if you want to give it to different sects of the population, you have various different protocols. There's so many other variants to what and how we need to vaccinate the whole population. That is where, if we open it up to private hospitals and other avenues, which is not what I've said, everyone else has noticed that as a immediate way in which more people can be reached. What they're saying is that we want to complement the government in what they're doing. We don't want to stop, what a great job they're doing, just to add to it, because our needs and population is so big that if they were to, in a restrictive sense, through their app and other systems, open it up to private hospitals, for example, where they buy the vaccine and then you go to that hospital. And of course, you should still be at a certain vulnerable category over the age of 50, maybe some comorbidities or whatever. So, there isn't enough vaccine, of course, to go around to everybody. So again, we need to focus on the vulnerable part, but just allow perhaps the private sector machinery to come in, step in, and help complement the government and work with the government to do it. I think that would be a good way in ramping things up just for maybe 6 months. And then anyway, it can be available in the private market after that. And then whoever wants to get it, they can get it,
So is there currently a reluctance to do that? Or is it just that the protocols have not been worked out?
No. So right now the government has taken the view that they want to vaccinate the most vulnerable people, the frontline healthcare workers, etc., because they don't want others to jump the queue. Because if it were to be opened up, and I subscribe to that, I fully endorse and understand that, and that's happening in all other countries also. First, you protect the vulnerable, and then you go, in the different phases. You see what's happened in the UK. There's multiple different phases, right? First, you give it to over the age of 80 or whatever, then I think 70 and so on, and like that, and then your front care. So, that's what's happening. Now in March, April, we're expecting some announcements from the government to further tweak that and go into phase 2 or phase 3, which can overlap with phase 1, which is, only government distribution. So it can happen in parallel is what they're probably proposing, but I don't want to say that because let them announce it. It's, they're leading the whole thinking on this. So we'll wait and see what happens.
Anuradha, on barriers to...
So I guess, we are looking here at substantial scale because, India is aiming to provide 600 million vaccinations, 60 crore. So 30 crore people, 60 crore vaccinations. And in case of COVID-19, speed is also very important. So as Adar said, I think the doses are scarce. So we need to make sure that priority groups are first targeted. Because if scarce doses start to get used for non-priority populations, then we have a big problem at hand. So I think that focus cannot be diluted. But at the same time, we need to do it at speed. Because if we don't arrest this virus, then we know that it is getting replicated and then mutant strains and so many other complications that I spoke about earlier. So 2 or 3 things. First, I feel is expansion of distribution points. So the delivery sites and delivery points would need to be substantially expanded. And I think that's where the government will have to do very careful thinking about partnering with private health facilities and providers. Because India has a very large network of private health facilities and providers. Once the ground rules are clearly laid out, understood, articulated, and there is a framework, which regulates vaccination, then I think that's something that is worthwhile, to explore. The second issue, is about, taking all these vaccines into rural areas, because you also have, priority groups in very remote locations. And the government definitely has that capacity, because India has run very large vaccination programs in the past. When I was there, I was leading polio fight. And, in one round, within 5 days, we used to actually cover 17 crore children. So India can definitely do it. And then I had also started this measles second dose, where again, crores of children were vaccinated. So, and higher age groups. So I think India has that experience, that ability to do large scale vaccination. But here, from my perspective, a very important point would be vaccine hesitancy. So, the availability of vaccines and then, of course, logistics, distribution network is one part, of the equation. But the other is vaccine confidence. And I think there a lot of work would need to happen in order to make sure that there is a very transparent, timely, effective public communication strategy, and also questions that people have actually are taken on board and responded in a very transparent manner.
I was under the impression that vaccine hesitancy was much less in India than, say, in the US. Is that not true?
No, so what has happened in the beginning, what we have seen is that when India started to roll out its program for health workforce, and that includes doctors, right, and all professionals, in many places, the uptake was as low as 20%, 10%, and then overall, it was about 50% in the beginning. And of course, now then they opened up for other essential workers as well. And now my understanding is that 75% of health workers have been vaccinated, but there still continues to be a challenge because for the second dose, I was following up on the data and statistics, 4% people turned up on the first day. And I think that also could happen because of this whole now communication challenge. WHO has said that the interval between 2 doses of AstraZeneca actually should be 8 to 12 weeks, right? And India, the protocol which is being followed is 4 weeks. So clearly doctors look at all this, right? And they might have some legitimate questions. So I think in this situation, a very nimble response to rapidly evolving evidence and is also very important.
Let me ask a different concluding question to each of you. Stay with Anuradha first for a second. What could be done better on the global scene? For instance, the functioning of WHO. We have our colleague Soumya, who's the chief scientist now. We're all very proud of that appointment. But what could the WHO do better, or what could GAVI do better, coordinating with WHO and CEPI and others on the world stage? And then I have a different question for Adar to wrap up.
So I do think that for the first time, we are seeing unprecedented global solidarity. We haven't seen this in the past ever, right? And different organizations coming together is something that is happening for the first time. And the second thing is that we are looking for the first time at an end-to-end solution. So CEPI didn't exist in the past, right? And it was GAVI that had to incentivize the development of Ebola vaccine. And that is the time when there was a lot of debate, and that led to CEPI's birth. But now CEPI is incentivizing development of vaccines, right? And that's where we have seen breakthroughs, right? And then we come in, GAVI comes in to focus on at-scale manufacturing, supply and distribution. And then WHO comes in with the policy, setting and also allocation criteria and regulatory angle. Now the point is, yes, we can definitely do a lot of things better. And that is first also making sure that we are more nimble in our responses. So one of the things, for example, could be regulatory approvals. And there is, for example, there are stringent regulatory authorities, that are providing approvals. And then is there a way, to expedite those approvals, I think is a big question. So we are learning on a daily basis. And let's see, I think we'll have a distillation of learnings to see that we are much better prepared.
So things are definitely evolving quickly. Adar, last question to you. Bunch of questions on the Q&A posts about the development of indigenous capability, not just in vaccines, but in life sciences in general. From your vantage point, again, not just in vaccines, but looking at the entire emergence of science-based health complex, what are your observations about? Do you see India making steps in that direction, or are we still lacking some key ingredients?
No, so absolutely good question. The ingredients are all there. And now combined with the fact that the world is looking and appreciating India's capabilities in all of this. And we've been known many times as the pharmacy of the world, because of the generic pharmaceutical companies also. We have some great companies, doing that. I think now you're going to see a lot of investment coming into India, which will enable India to innovate also and be a leader in development and innovation. Traditionally we were known as manufacturers, generic manufacturers. I see a shift in 5 years. We've made our own vaccines, some of them as well. Bharat Biotech has made their own. So we're going to see a shift where we just partner with Western companies to manufacture their products. And that'll be, again, the next step, that finally innovation can also happen in India. But for that, let me tell you, you need big bucks. You need billions of dollars, which traditionally Western companies have had access to public markets and investors and their own governments who have given them billions of dollars. Just look at the pandemic disparity. Yeah. The US government, right, gave $2 billion each to manufacturers. What did we get? We got nothing, right? And we took our own risk. We raised money from, in fact, US philanthropists and GAVI and others who have always supported us. And again, that limits your ability to only manufacture. But if you want to innovate, you want to take the next step, I think that's where India is headed, both in the pharmaceutical space, the vaccine space, biologic space. So these are indeed exciting times. And, if we look at some of the good things that have come out of the pandemic, if I were to shed some light on it and be optimistic, the light has come to India and drawn the world's attention to India and India's capabilities. So now it is up to Indian companies and organizations to take advantage of that, and not lose the opportunities in the short term. So I think that's where we are.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'd put in a plug for, as you just said, greater public goods investments. I mean, most of the great companies in America are built on substantial public good investment. That's kind of the societal compact that we have in America, which is that the taxpayer funds the creation of public goods, and then everybody, an individual entrepreneur, is free to grab that and do something incremental with it and, build a company on it. But we're lacking that attention. I know many of us are working on trying to build the science-based infrastructure. So it's great to have both of you as partners in this. And we are out of time. And I want to thank you for a scintillating conversation on a most topical issue. Thank you, Anuradha, for being up early in Geneva. And thank you, Adar, for taking time again. And kudos to the Harvard student team for pulling this together. Shaheen, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Tarun. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Lovely to see you both. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. On behalf of the entire Harvard India Conference organizing team, I want to extend my deepest gratitudes to all our panelists today, Professor Khanna, Mr. Poonawalla, Ms. Gupta, for being here today. It's truly humbling, and both we're humble and privileged to have you here. So thank you. And also for accommodating us in your busy schedules and at odd hours. And a very big thank you to also our audiences who've tuned in from across the world, really, from US, from Europe, from India, and have live in the discussion with their comments and their questions. Now I'll pass it on to my colleagues here in Burgess to take us through the closing ceremony. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
We've now come to the end of the 18th Annual Harvard India Conference. In the wise words of Max Muller, if I were asked under what sky the human mind has most fully developed some of its choicest gifts, has most deeply pondered on the greatest problems of life, and has found solutions, I should point to India. With sessions covering topics ranging from Bollywood to business, education to the environment, and politics to prophylaxis, our topics shed light on several issues of critical importance to India and the world. Our conference mission was to enable our audience to hear about India's future from those building it. We hope that we have achieved that. We will begin posting content from these sessions on social media platforms soon, subject to the speaker permission. We thank our attendees for your deep levels of engagement throughout the conference. Your thoughtful questions and dedication to learning more about India inspired our speakers and organizing team. Thank you.
We would also like to acknowledge all the hard work that has gone into planning this conference. With a deep sense of gratitude, we acknowledge the Harvard Business School and the Harvard Kennedy School clubs and the IT teams that helped us in running a smooth show, especially Jane, Cindy, Trevor, and Razvan for all their support. Special thanks to all the student volunteers and panelists who so generously gave their time and effort to prepare for this, including on weekends and holidays. We are also very appreciative of our sponsors, Godrej and Vadam, for their generous support. Finally, thank you everyone for joining us on this weekend from across the globe. We hope that you join us for the Harvard India Conference 2022. We hope to have an in-person event next year. However, organizing this conference remotely for the first time ever has encouraged us to continue with a digital medium to ensure that our content reaches all those interested around the world. India Conference at Harvard is truly a reflection of the dreams and aspirations of the Indian students at Harvard, and we remain deeply committed to addressing and discussing the problems that our country faces. On this note, the Harvard India Conference 2021 comes to an end. Thank you everyone for joining us.